Namaskar, y'all. Welcome back to Yoga Answers. I'm Brother John, and I'm here to hopefully answer any questions you may have about yoga or meditation. All right. Today, we're going to just cover some basic misconceptions that people tend to have about yoga. Okay, let's just start there. When I was doing a yoga teacher training course through my guru's ashram in India, we talked about the common misconceptions of yoga and why people just don't embrace it or investigate it because they just don't understand it. The first misconception is that yoga is a religion or is specifically tied to Hindu religions. It is a Hindu worship practice. I just posted a video specifically on this, so I'm not going to go into detail. Go watch the video on Is Yoga a Religion? The answer is no. It was created alongside, parallel to, and an adjunct for the religions of the Indian subcontinent, but itself is not a religion. It falls under Sankhya, which is yogic philosophy, and the practices that come from the Yoga Sutras is the Patanjali, written around 200 BC, is the benchmark for what is yoga, what is not yoga, how to do yoga, what's the goal of yoga, what's the final end result. And there are texts that are before that and texts that have come after that. And the 8 limbs of yoga, known as Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs, are laid out in the Yoga Sutras. So just by going there, right, reading the Upanishads, reading the Bhagavad Gita, reading the Yoga Sutras, you quickly deduce that yoga is a spiritual path combined with techniques, and it is not bound to a specific religion. In fact, in the Yoga Sutras, right, we're going to say that, like, everyone agrees, the Yoga Sutras is the benchmark, be all, end all text on the topic of yoga. And it begins by saying yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. It is about bringing the mind into a quiet state so that we can perceive pure consciousness and thus the divinity within all things. It does not mention anywhere in the Yoga Sutras a specific deity. It does not say, at this point you will pray to Vishnu. At this point, get on your knees, ring a bell in the temple, and worship Brahma. Okay, it mentions Ishvara. That is the only mention of divinity. And Ishvara means Lord in Sanskrit. That's it, Lord. And Ishvara is defined in the Yoga Sutras as a special soul, one that is larger and grander and that encompasses all the little individual souls of all things in existence. The Atman of the individual being, you, me, the hummingbird, your dog, mailman, and the Paramatman, Brahman, the supreme being, right? Put those two together, right? Ishvara, the Lord, the special soul, the oversoul that all these little separate souls spring from, and return to. That's it. It also says that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Ishvara, the reason why it's not named with any specific name is because Ishvara takes on whatever, I don't want to say personage or personality or appearance. Those are all anthropomorphic ideas and terms about God. Ishvara takes on whatever concept, let's say that the seeker resonates with. So if in your heart, when you're seeking God through meditation, and you view the Buddha, right? That's your form of supreme being. You're trying to attain Buddhahood. Buddha, Ishvara for you is Buddha. Ishvara becomes Buddha. Ishvara doesn't care. He doesn't have an ego and says, worship me the way I am. If you need him to be Buddha, he's going to be Buddha. If you are a Christian, Ishvara becomes Jesus. Or if you don't believe in organized religions and you just want to worship the sacred light that all religions speak of, the light of divinity in the heart of all beings, Ishvara is that for you. Okay? So is yoga a religion? No. According to the Yoga Sutras, there is no specific rituals or temple practices or anything that we would associate with religion. Okay? And there is no specific God. There is a general overarching understanding of divinity that is referred to as Ishvara. Okay. The second big misconception about yoga, especially in the West, in America, is that yoga is restricted to asanas, the physical postures. And the majority of arguments that I have heard against yoga and the practice of it always stem on, what do the poses actually mean? If I do the poses, am I worshiping a Hindu god? And all this stuff. And there's a lot of theological debate about, what the poses represent and do and blah, blah, blah. To think of yoga as only the poses. Let me give you an example. Let's think of our human body, okay? And let's think of all the different systems that make up the body. The skeleton, the nerves, the muscles, the skin, the heart, the brain, the lungs, okay? All of these things that are integral for this meat bag to make it down the street and buy groceries and drive a car and survive. To say that yoga is hatha yoga, the poses, the physical poses, is akin to saying the human body is the right thumb. And that's it. This is all that the human body is. You don't need your lungs, you don't need your heart, you don't need your brain, you don't need your nervous system, you don't need your parasympathetic nervous system because you got your thumb. Do you see how that makes zero sense? If you, again, in the video that I did on Is Yoga a Religion, I talked about the different types of yoga and that this physical form of yoga, hatha yoga, the poses, the hatha yoga pradipika was not written until the 1400s AD. The spiritual practice of yoga with no asanas, no physical poses, goes back to written accounts 1500 BC. And there are archaeological evidence in the Indus Valley at places like Mohenjo-Daro that show echoes of a proto-Shiva and yogic postures in archaeological evidence going back 10,000 years. So, from time immemorial, the yoga practice and belief system has been passed down through the Indian subcontinent. In writing alone, we have 3,000 years of refining the practice and the literature and the holy texts until we get to this 14th 1400s and hatha, the inventions of hatha yoga. So it makes zero sense to say that this thing that was just invented in the last 700 years is yoga. That encapsulates all of yoga. And we discount the entire 3,000 year history and the origins of yoga. True yoga. If we look at the Yoga Sutras, as I just mentioned, which is the ultimate source, it only mentions asana, physical poses, 3 times. In the steps, the 8 limbs of yoga, it's the yamas, the niyamas, asana, which is poses, pratyahara, which is sense control, pranayama, breath control, dharana, concentration, which results in dhyana, which is meditation, which results in samadhi, expanded states of consciousness. None of that. The little bit that is about asanas, it says the pose should be comfortable for long periods of meditation. That is the only thing that it says about the pose, that it should be done in a clean place and it should be comfortable for long periods of meditation. There is no discussion of specific poses because they didn't exist. That wasn't created until the 1400s, and the Yoga Sutras were written in 200 BC, thousands of years earlier. So yoga cannot be restricted to just the asanas. Okay? Hatha yoga, the asanas, are one tiny aspect of the entire overarching pantheon of schools of yoga. So while we're on the subject of hatha yoga, let's just cover kind of 3 misconceptions all at once because they have to do with physical hatha yoga poses. They also have to do with um, breathing techniques. These same misconceptions extend then to other spiritual techniques like visualization, or mantras, or other inner practices. So the first misconception about the physical poses is that you need to be flexible to start practicing. So if you're just considering, entering into some physical yoga and you think I can't do it because I'm not flexible enough, yoga meets you where you're at. There is absolutely no reason to come in and be uncomfortable and have it be stressful. That's not the goal of yoga. The goal of yoga, even the physical poses, is to teach the body to control the mind and to slow the mind down with the breathing, and then you end your yoga session lying on the mat and entering into hopefully a brief meditative peaceful state, right? It's not just let's work out and bend and stretch and sweat and then we split. Okay, it should be in traditional Hatha yoga, you should be ending with Shavasana, right? A peaceful laying down, quietening. Okay, so you don't have to be flexible to begin the practice. Okay, that's a misconception. The other misconception that kind of goes along with that is that yoga is gentle, easy stretching. And there's two sides to this coin, okay? Many of the poses in Hatha yoga are progressively difficult and require a lot of core strength, and you have to have, like, you can't be a big guy like me, okay? And there's no way I can get up into some pose and hold my body weight, like up on my arms and my shoulders. So people see that, these hyper fit individuals doing these incredibly difficult poses, and there's a disconnect, right? Well, I thought yoga was gentle, simple stretching, but then I go and I see the teachers are doing these super advanced, crazy things, and I can't do that. So, which is it? If you are going to follow Hatha, it will become progressively more difficult. Okay? That's the practice, that's its job. And there's reasons for that, and there's reasons why I don't practice Hatha and don't do that. There are the practices that I do actually are gentle, easier, what you would almost consider stretching um, movements. But again, as I said, the entire purpose and function of them is about interior energy release of the prana. Now, the third misconception is that for a yoga pose, an asana, to be effective, it has to be difficult, right? The more difficult poses that you see advanced practitioners and teachers doing are the ones that are going to have the most significant results and benefits. This is probably one of the biggest misconceptions about yoga in general. And this falls into interior practices, breath work, concentration techniques. Many seekers believe that the path cannot be simple. All the techniques have to be difficult. If my teacher starts me out with a simple technique, I clamor and clamor for a more advanced one because my ego tells me it can't be that easy and I need to advance to a more difficult technique to advance spiritually. And that is not true in any way, shape, or form. The process of undoing our egos and attaining realization with the divine self is the most natural, simple, effortless thing that we will ever do. In some schools, it's termed effortless effort. You will find that very effective techniques, the most effective ones, tend to be very easy, simple, subtle, because they're meant for everyone, for all humanity to be able to practice at any time without having to reach some lofty goal. Now, let me throw a caveat in there. Special schools of yoga in the past where there were different spiritual requirements within that yoga. They had to do more physical kind of penance, severe yoga. And yes, from in that period, spiritual advancement was kind of bound to the, the austerities that a yogi would perform, and the more difficult techniques were required. There are plenty of yogic techniques that are graceful and simple and easy, and they provide results. Do not think that a technique has to be difficult for it to be effective. The final thing I kind of want to point out is this last misconception that yoga is for hermits living in the Himalayas. When I began my spiritual search in 2007, I was reading a book called The Secret Doctrine by Helena Blavatsky of the Theosophy movement. This very dense, difficult text, The Secret Doctrine, but a line jumped out at me. And it was talking about enlightened beings who lived in caves in the Himalayas, these great spiritual masters. And I had never heard of any such thing. But something in me, it like rang a bell. And I was like, oh, I need to know more about that. Something about that. You know, these masters, spiritual masters in Himalayan caves. I felt like I was being called home. I was like, I had never heard of any such thing in my life growing up in America. But the first time I heard about it, it was just like being reminded of something I'd always known and just forgotten. And she said, and their sacred text is the Upanishads. So the next day I went out to my local bookstore to find a copy of the Upanishads. And before I could find a copy, I picked up a copy of Paramahamsa Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi. And, you know, I kind of flipped it open and was reading through it. And there he is mentioning these sacred beings, these enlightened masters in the Himalayas. And he wants to run off to the Himalayas and go study with them. But then he finds his guru in the city where he's living. But there's someone else reaffirming this. So I say all of this to say, even I fell under the misconception that yoga was only out here, these mystical dudes in the caves, and that, you know, if you want to find yoga and practice yoga and find the real secret truths, you have to run off to the Himalayan caves to really know yoga. And that misconception is so strong that Yogananda felt the same way. Someone who grew up in India, whose family had a guru, and yet he felt the pull to, you know, go off. Yoga does not belong to some hidden Himalayan yogis in a cave or monks up in some Himalayan temple. Yes, it's preserved there and it exists there, absolutely. And that's where its foundations come from. But it belongs to humanity. And the proof of this is the majority of gurus and yogis and yoginis in my tradition of Kriya Yoga. Both my first teacher and my current teacher, my guru who initiated me, they are householders, is the term. Okay? They are husbands, fathers, business owners. They are not sadhus. They are not wandering holy men with no possessions who live in caves or in the forests in India. Those people are there, and that's great, and they exist, and that's fine. But within my tradition, for centuries, if not longer, who knows, it's been about householders bringing the ancient wisdom and the ancient practices into their family and through their family into their community, um, which is what I'm trying to do. You are my community, and I am a householder. I have a son, and I can't run off to the Himalayas and live in a cave. But there's no reason to. The people who need yoga are not living in the caves. They're living in the cities with the rest of us, where the suffering is, where the noise is, where the difficulty is. And those are the people, one would think, who need inner peace and solutions for finding harmony with others and to be able to see the divinity within all, including themselves. Those people exist here in the everyday world. Yoga belongs in communities, it belongs in cities, it belongs in the public where people can have access to it. It was restricted to the Himalayas for a long period of time simply due to the yugas, the darker states in which humanity was moving, and due to this kind of ignorance and human indifference, yoga was falling away and disappearing from the Indian culture. And it was actually the Nath Sampradaya, the Nath lineage of yogis, my guru's lineage, who stepped up and preserved it for humanity and for history centuries ago, and have been passing it down and making sure that the original teachings are not lost. So you do not have to run to the Himalayas or go to India or Tibet or Nepal to find answers to the ancient, secret, sacred science of yoga.